it tonight. So Christa, it's all yours.
Great. Welcome to everyone. It's so great to be here with you. Thanks to everyone for being on this webinar and for being interested in this important topic. I work with many schools and youth serving organizations, and there's often confusion around what is conflict, peer conflict, and what is bullying, and how do we know the difference? And then once we know the difference, what do we do about it? So that's what we're here to discuss tonight. And I just want to give you a little extra background about myself, and that is that I was raised in a family of educators. So my mother was a kindergarten teacher. My father was a professor. I have an older sister who's a special education teacher for elementary level, and then I have a twin sister who actually is a language arts English teacher. So I work with a lot of schools and folks who work with youth, and I think it's the most important work. So I hope that something that I present tonight can be useful to you. So I'm going to go ahead and pull up my presentation. Give me a second to do that. Okay. So we're going to dive right into this idea about conflict and what is conflict, right? So I wanted to share a definition with you that I have of conflict, and it really is this one. When two or more people experience a perceived incompatibility of their needs, wants, values, or goals. That is conflict. And this might be a new definition for some of you, but it is a definition that we use regularly in the field of conflict resolution. And I want to point out these bold words here, perceived incompatibility. And it's really important that we recognize that sometimes our needs, wants, values, or goals are not incompatible. We can actually find ways to make it work together, but we have an idea or a perception that they're incompatible. And when that happens, I feel what I want and what you want does not match, does not go together. Then we experience what we call a conflict situation. So I want to talk about conflict indicators and what those are. So in a conflict situation, the intention of the people involved is to meet a need or a goal that they have in mind. So that's their intention and their motivation. Conflict is around a specific issue or incident where there's this perceived incompatibility, that goals can't go together. A lot of people think that conflict and violence are the same thing, but actually conflict is an everyday occurrence that most of us experience more than once a day, probably, right? Where we have a disagreement or a goal that we want to meet and somebody else seems to be blocking that or wants something different. It's not necessarily aggressive. It doesn't have to include aggression. How we choose to handle conflict can sometimes be aggressive, but we can also choose to handle conflict in respectful, productive ways. And a power imbalance may or may not exist in a conflict situation. And I'm going to talk more about that when I explain what bullying is versus what conflict is. Okay, so these are the indicators. How do we know we're having a conflict with someone? Well, we have a goal that we're trying to meet. It seems to be different or blocked by someone else. It's around a specific issue, and we need to try to find a way of addressing it. Now, another indicator that I don't have written here, but that's very important, is that we usually have some emotions around conflict, right? So we may feel frustration or anxiety or be upset in some way because our goal and our need is being blocked. Okay, so what is bullying then? What is bullying if it's different from conflict? This is our definition of bullying based on over 20 years of research of people asking both adults and students of their experiences and of looking at the dynamics of bullying and what the impact of bullying is in schools and in other organizations. So bullying is when someone intentionally harms another person. They do it repeatedly through acts of physical, emotional, verbal, or cyber aggression. So physical aggression might include anything having to do with kicking, punching, hitting, right? All of those acts. Emotional aggression is using relationships to bully someone or calling someone a harmful name, which is also bullying, right? Causing fear or an embarrassment on purpose some way. Insults, threats, that falls under verbal, or cyber aggression. So that would include the use of technology to do the emotional or verbal aggression. So in a bullying situation, the person who is the target experiences fear, embarrassment, pain, or some other kind of negative outcome. And in a bullying incident, there is the creation or reinforcement of a power imbalance, And this is an important aspect of the dynamic of bullying that is not always the case in a conflict situation. So what kind of power are we talking about here? The typical scenario a lot of people are familiar with is sort of a larger person picking on a smaller person. So that power imbalance might be strength or size. But actually, in bullying situations, especially with students or at school, we see social power being something that's very important to students. Social power has to do with popularity or rank among students, who's getting attention, who has access to a teacher or an authority figure, who can influence other students to do things for them or to other students, right? So we're talking about social power here, and the bullying dynamic increases that imbalance of power. And the bully is doing this intentionally because they know that it will allow them to continue with their behaviors and to cause more harm. So just to recap, we're looking at the indicators of bullying. It's intentionally done to harm. It's a repeated dynamic, so not the same as a mistake that a student makes or a thoughtless remark or gesture. Those can be corrected by asking the person to stop or by telling them that they've crossed the line, and they'll stop. In the bullying dynamic, the behavior is repeated. It's aggressive in some way, physically, emotionally, verbally, or cyber, and there is a power imbalance. So we figured out if it's conflict or bullying, yes? So just to review, I'm going to go back a few slides. In conflict, there's an incompatibility of needs, wants, values, or goals. And the intention is not to harm, but to meet a goal. It's not necessarily aggressive, and it's about a specific incident. In bullying, the intention is to harm, causes a negative outcome, and increases power. Okay. So once we have figured out if a situation is bullying or conflict, we need to know then what to do about those situations, right? How to handle it. And by the way, that might not always be clear up front if the situation is bullying or conflict, because oftentimes when students report issues, or we might even see a situation in front of us, there's a lot of information that's missing, right? We may not be sure who is the aggressor and who is being picked on. We might not know if the students are good friends. We might not know what's happened prior to the incident that we're seeing. And so oftentimes it's important that we look a little more closely and ask questions to find out if a situation is a bullying situation or a conflict situation. Okay, once we know what it is, then we need to know what to do about it, right? So what we want to do is think about how to handle conflict in a productive way. And the best way that we can do this is focus on learning the skills that are needed to manage conflict in respectful ways. And here are some of the skills that I've found are most powerful and useful in teaching students to handle conflict. First is emotional awareness and management skills. I'm going to talk about that a little bit more. Communication skills, problem solving, and de-escalation. So I'm wondering if anyone's on the call right now who can access the chat function, if you would just maybe share in the chat which of these skills do you feel your students need some work on in particular? It would be interesting to see what folks can put in the chat. I'm going to give you a moment. I actually can't see the chat right now, so Cynthia, if you can see it, if anyone's written anything, if you wouldn't mind chiming in.
I don't see anything yet.
Okay,
Oh,
no
here's
problem.
one. Here's one, de-escalation.
Okay, great. So I work with all age level students from kindergarten up through adults. And what I find is that most people need some work on all of these skills, right? Because most of us haven't taken a formal course in emotional awareness or management or even communication or problem solving. You know, most of us didn't have formal education in these areas at all. What we've done is we've usually learned from our family group, right? Growing up, we kind of observe how our parents or guardians are managing their conflict and our siblings, and that gives us some information about what, you know, can be done to manage conflict. Sometimes those models and the information we get is not the best information, right? And sometimes what worked when we were younger doesn't work for us anymore as we get older. So learning about conflict and conflict resolution skills should really happen at each age and grade level so that students can apply these skills to increasingly complex social interactions and practice and get better at them. Let's talk about emotional awareness as one of the things that we need to develop our skills in. Really, emotional awareness is the ability to recognize in the moment how you're feeling. So asking yourself, how am I feeling today? And then knowing how those feelings will impact your behavior, right? So being aware if you're grumpy and knowing that your grumpiness will maybe have you have negative facial expressions or answer someone who asks you a question in a very curt way, right? That might cause some conflict where one really didn't exist just because of the emotions that you're experiencing. And remember earlier I said that conflict is an emotional experience, right? We tend to feel frustrated when we can't meet our goals. This is why it's important that we learn emotional awareness and management skills, because conflict evokes emotions in us. And if we don't know how to handle the emotions, we're never going to get to that communication and problem solving piece we need to get to, because instead we're too busy either being distracted by our own feelings or expressing them in some way that is not healthy or respectful or productive. So I regularly teach students how to manage their feelings. One of the tools you might want to use is a feelings cards. This is a deck that I created that helps students by giving them cues with facial expressions and words of feelings on there, so they can pull a card out of the deck or they can expand their emotional vocabulary. And this does not have to take a lot of time. This is something that can happen in very brief 5 or 10 minute sections, you know, throughout the week. And the more you do it, the better they'll get at accessing their feelings and then understanding how those feelings will impact their behavior. So once they begin to become aware of their feelings, then we need to learn emotional management skills. So here are some of the emotional management strategies that we might want to use that will help us be able to slow down our thoughts and calm down our body so that we can then engage in problem solving. So positive self-talk, right? So if you have a negative tape going in your mind, this is horrible, I can't do this, why does this always happen to me? Being aware of that is the first step, and then changing that negative talk into positive self-talk is the second step. This is super useful for some of our students that have sort of a negative tape going in their mind. We can use visualization, and this is so easy and can be used anywhere and done by anyone. No one has to know you're doing it. And you can visualize a problem being solved in the future. You can visualize something that you really enjoy that makes you feel happy, right? And if you have difficulty actually visualizing in your mind, you can keep a picture or a postcard or something nearby that you can look at that will help moderate your feelings, right? So I have a picture of my 2 dogs. They're pugs, and they're pretty ridiculous looking. And I have a cute picture of them that I look at, and even when I'm upset or frustrated, I'll look at them and it will make me smile. And so the act of smiling actually sends a message to my brain and my body that I'm maybe not that upset. So it helps me start to calm down and change my mood. Anything that you do to slow your body reaction down is also positive. So breathing, or getting some of that energy out through exercise, taking a break, drinking some water. These are all things that help calm our body down. Our body gets very agitated when we're upset. You could also talk to a friend, right? And that talk should be productive talk. So you might need to vent a little bit, but then you want to change into some productive talk about the problem or situation. And mindfulness. Mindfulness facilitates all of these emotional management strategies. Mindfulness really means an awareness of what is, what's happening, to notice exactly what's happening when it's happening. So mindfulness helps us become aware of our own feelings and create a little bit of space so that we can then choose an emotional management strategy to help calm ourselves down. So this is a really important first step in the conflict resolution process. And it's a step that I sometimes see people skip at schools or elsewhere. And they try to get students problem solving, but they're not able to problem solve because they're too distracted by their emotions. And they want to vent or get their emotions out. So I want to suggest that we teach them some of these strategies so that they can accept their feelings, but then also manage their feelings so that they can get ready then to problem solve. After we do the emotional management piece, then we need to do some kind of productive communication, right? So some of you might be familiar with iMessages, and that's basically a way of communicating that helps reduce defensiveness. So instead of saying, "You're so mean, you never let me play this game," I would say, "I feel sad when I'm left out. I would like to play the game with you." Sounds very different, right? When we replace the you with the I. So the iMessage formula, I taught that to a group of 4th, 5th, and 6th graders today, actually. We practiced it. And they agreed that it was challenging to express how you're feeling and say what you want. But it's important because it connects our feelings to the conflict situation, and then we're able to clearly communicate what we don't like and make a request, assertive request about what we would like to see happen. So that's a type of productive communication that we need to help our students learn so they can resolve conflicts. We want to teach them about body language, right? So if they're doing this and trying to resolve conflict, it's sending a negative message, they may not even be aware. So helping students be aware of their body language and how to do inviting body language that will help them solve problems. Brainstorming solutions, coming up with a lot of ideas first before evaluating them. Helping them take perspective, helping them imagine another person's point of view. If I was that person, what I would be thinking, feeling, what that conflict would look like and feel like from that perspective. This is a challenging skill that I recommend you work on before there's a problem. Because when we're in conflict, it's actually very difficult to take someone else's perspective because we have resistance to it, right? In that time where we have conflict. So practicing this when we're not in conflict is very important. It helps us apply it when we are in conflict. So you can do that very easily through reading stories with students. When you're looking at literature, you can ask them questions about different characters' point of view. And that's one way to get them practicing that skill. And then finally, active listening. And that's listening with your mind and your heart. So listening to what someone is saying carefully, but also listening for the feelings underneath the words and being able to then repeat or restate what's been said. So these are a lot of skills that we need to help students learn for them to be productive at conflict resolution. And I did this activity with students today. It's a conflict self-assessment from the Create a Culture of Kindness book. And we looked at these skills and I asked students, which of these skills are you doing right now? I'll give you a moment to take a look here. Listen openly to what the other person has to say. Avoid judging. Trying to put myself in the other person's shoes. Calming down before I react. Do you see how these skills here match the ones we just talked about? Emotional management, perspective taking, productive communication. There's the assertive is underlined there because my students didn't know what that meant. So we looked it up in the dictionary, and we talked about passive, assertive, and aggressive. These are quite a number of skills. Not an easy thing. We're all on a learning journey with these. But I like this idea of asking students to reflect on these skills themselves, and they identified which new skills they wanted to learn. So we started to create a plan for them to learn these new skills. Okay, so if we really want to help students deal with conflict, we have to allow them to practice and apply these skills on a daily basis. And our measure of success is that they're getting better at it. Not that they're perfect, right? But that they're getting better at it. So we need to recognize that conflict is a normal, everyday experience. It's not something that we need to avoid. It's something we all experience. We just need to learn how to handle it correctly. It's a really important part of child development because through conflict situations, students can learn more about themselves. They can practice their assertion skills. They can practice self-control. They learn about relationships. There's a lot of really important things they learn through handling and managing conflict. Okay, so peer mediation is one of the ways that we can help students handle conflicts and solve conflicts with one another. And it's a really special way because what it does is it trains peers, so students themselves, to help manage conflict of their peers. And this is really has an advantage, actually, over adults trying to solve kid problems because students will always be speaking at the level of their peers, right? The language that they're using. They're going to understand the kinds of conflicts that peers are bringing to them. So they actually have some strengths in helping peers handle conflict that adults might not have. So what is peer mediation? Peer mediation is a method of conflict resolution in which peers help others resolve interpersonal problems. And they do this by listening, I mentioned active listening, and by facilitating a step-by-step negotiation and agreement process between the parties that are having the conflict. So here are some indicators of peer mediation, some criteria for it to really be successful. It should be a voluntary process. So we shouldn't have to force students to go to mediation because we're really asking them to engage in a problem-solving process. And if they don't want to be there or they're forced to be there, we're not going to get real participation that we need to come up with a good solution. So it should be voluntary. The mediators should be impartial, meaning they don't take sides. The discussion is confidential, so they can feel free to bring up different issues and not worry that everyone is going to hear about them. It's disputant-led, and that means that the two students who are having the conflict, they are the ones brainstorming solutions, not the peer mediators. Okay, so they're defining the problem together, and they're generating and brainstorming solutions. And then it's safe. We need to provide a safe space for students to work through conflict together. So it should be a relatively private space. There should be adult supervision nearby. And the mediators need to learn how to be welcoming and reassure their peers that this problem-solving process will be something that will give them a productive outcome. Here's a peer mediator I trained holding up our peer mediation folder with the steps in it. So what is the process for peer mediation then? Normally there's ground rules for participation in the peer mediation process. And those usually include things like no attacks or name calling, an agreement to confidentiality. Some processes have the rules already written. Some ask the disputants to come up with a set of rules that they will use. Both of those can work. I've seen both of those work quite well. Then there's a storytelling process where each side describes what's been going on, their understanding of the problem, right? The points of view is when we actually ask each disputant to restate what the other person has said so that we can check for understanding and so that we can get them really trying to think about the problem from the other person's point of view. Not all peer mediation processes include this step, but I've found it to be very, very productive with the students that I work with. Once they say in their own words what the other person's perspective is, it helps them really get in touch with not only the problem, but the emotional aspect of the problem as well in a new way. Then they engage in a brainstorming process and try to generate solutions to the conflict. And then they need to find a solution that's mutually agreeable to them. They should only make an agreement of solutions that they can both say, yes, this works for me and I can follow through. So that is the peer mediation process. And if anyone has a question about the peer mediation process, feel free to type that in the chat and we'll definitely have some time at the end to answer some of your questions. Okay, so I want to talk about peer mediation skills then, because peer mediation is a straightforward process, but it is complex. It's asking that peers be non-judgmental. So even if they're having judgments in their mind, right, about who's right and who's wrong, we ask them to put that aside and not let it impact their facilitation of the conflict resolution process. So that's something to practice with students, having them recognize through mindfulness the judgments that are coming up and then having them place those aside so they can really listen well. So again, the active listening means listening very carefully to what people are saying and to be able to restate what people are saying, to reflect back to them, maybe their feelings, be able to summarize their main points. It's very helpful. They can reframe positive or negative statements into positive ones. So if the disputants use blaming language, they can take the blame part out and just reframe. So if one of the participants say, you know, that person is completely lying and I can't believe that they would betray my friendship, the peer mediator might say, I hear you saying that you feel the person is not being honest and you feel hurt because you trusted them and they broke your trust. So that is a way to summarize and restate what's been said, but to reframe it in a way that maybe can be heard a little bit better by the other party. And then they might need to learn some de-escalation skills. So if participants are getting agitated and their voices are rising, or they start, you know, leaning in or looking like they're going to jump up or something like that, mediators need to know to be aware of those escalation signs and how to take some steps to de-escalate through their nonverbal communication and verbal communication. And finally, they need to know how to affirm and value each participant and what they're saying and what they're sharing in the mediation process. Because it's very, very important that both participants, disputants, are heard and feel respected. And that will really help them participate fully in the peer mediation process. Okay, so we just reviewed, and I'll just flip the slides back here a little bit so we can look at it again. Peer mediation, the process, the skills, some criteria for it, right? What it is. And this is one method of helping students handle conflict once we decide that a situation is really a conflict situation. Okay, what if the situation is not conflict, but it's really bullying? Then what do? We handle it a little bit differently. We don't want to bring a person who's bullying and the target of that bullying into a peer mediation session necessarily. And the reason we don't want to do that is because we're recognizing that the intention of the person doing bullying is to harm the target. And we recognize there is some kind of power imbalance that we discussed earlier, right? So if we bring them together in a peer mediation process, it could be the case that the bully uses that process actually to target the victim some more, to gain information they can use about them later. And the target of the bullying, because of their lack of power, may not be able to or feel comfortable communicating what the problem is, what they need or want, and they might agree to a solution which they don't feel comfortable with because they feel pressured in that situation. So I'm going to offer another solution for how we might handle bullying if we don't refer it to pure mediation, which is better used for conflict. So in bullying, we want to focus on two things, both prevention and intervention, right? So first of all, I want to just suggest that you check your country, your state law, your school policies. Here in the United States, each state has legislation about bullying and how it should be handled. And then school boards generally have a policy about it. And then individual schools and districts might have policies written into their disciplinary practices. So you want to refer to that to make sure that you're, following the law with respect to bullying. You also want to educate your staff, your students, and your parents. So everyone should know what bullying is. That definition we reviewed earlier, its impacts on students, right? And we should all be aware of what we can do to be part of a solution. I'm going to get to that. We need to know that bullying is not acceptable as a regular part of growing up. So while conflict is seen as an everyday occurrence, right, that we want to even welcome in some ways so we can practice our skills to get better at resolving it, bullying is not. So what do we do for prevention and intervention? So we want to create a culture of kindness and acceptance. A lot of bullies will use some kind of difference, a perceived difference of someone, something about their identity, their looks, their race, their religion, their culture, the way someone speaks, their size, any of those things, really. They will use that difference against the target. And so the more we can create a culture of kindness and acceptance among all students and all peers, the better able we will be to prevent bullying and also to get students to stand up for one another and to report bullying when they see it happening. We need good adult supervision and involvement. So that means that we might want to find out where bullying is happening within a building or a school. Is it happening on the bus, during arrival, dismissal, lunchtime, in the hallways? How do we find this out? We'll probably need to survey the students and ask them what's going on in the school and where is it happening. And then we'll want to make sure that we have more adult supervision in those areas where it's happening. And also, adults need to be very clear that bullying is not accepted and that they want to know when it's happening, and there should be an anonymous way for students to report it if they would like adult assistance. What we do know is that although 30% of students report being bullied in some way, we know that many fewer of those students actually report the bullying to an adult or teacher. Oftentimes they hesitate to report it because they're afraid of the bullying getting worse, or that the student doing the bullying will find out and get back at them somehow, or they just may not know who to go to or who to talk to. So we need to have them be aware that we are there for them and we want to know what's going on and we want to be able to help in some way. But if they don't report, or even if they do, we still want to teach them skills they can use in the moment, right? To speak up and stand up against bullying, and most especially to help a targeted student, the victim. If all of our students can develop skills for supporting those who are targeted, we will decrease the negative impact of bullying on our students. And we can help students themselves put an end to it and say, this is not acceptable behavior here. So we want to teach them some upstander skills. What are those skills? I was working with a group of high school students and having them brainstorm what it means to be a bystander and what it means to be an upstander. And there are some risks involved, but what they recognized that if we focus on supporting the victim or target, anyone can be an upstander, because we can all do a support strategy, which I'm going to review now. So here are some upstander skills. The first is to disagree with the bully's words or actions, right? So helping students learn assertive language to say, I don't think that's funny. You don't believe what that person says. I think that you're really talented. So saying something in the moment to disagree with the bully's words or actions is a powerful intervention strategy. The next strategies, the next 4 that I have listed here, are actually support strategies. They don't have anything to do with confronting the bully, but they have everything to do with supporting the target. And by the way, these are things that students themselves in grades 3 through 12 said were most helpful to them. So the first is to include others and invite them in. So what we know is that students that can have a social group, right, a positive social group, they sort of are protected of being targeted by bullies, right? So and even if they are picked on, if someone sits with them or invites them over, it has a really meaningful impact on them, that they're not as socially ostracized as a bully wants them to feel, because they have a group to be with. The next thing is to just listen without judgment. So students who've been targets of bullying have said that, I just really want someone to hear what I'm going through. And I want them to understand how hard this has been. And I want them to listen without judgment, without making me feel like I did something wrong or that it was my fault in some way. And some students say they want advice, and others say, really, I just want someone to listen, and it's so helpful to me. So all of us can provide that, listening without judgment. Accept differences. So teaching our students that differences are exciting and positive, and we should respect differences of all kinds, is a really important thing to create a culture of kindness. Differences are too often used by students as sort of weapons against one another, right? And we really need to change this paradigm that we have about difference being bad. So we can actually do some exercises, pair share exercises, to help students get to know one another better, to share their differences, to be proud of their differences, right? We can highlight them. We can learn more about someone's background or culture or identity, right? In a way that's done in an ongoing fashion throughout the year, not just when something is going wrong, right? But make it a really positive aspect of the day to share about one another and learn about one another. And then finally, to check in on the person. So students who are being bullied or picked on have said that it's really meaningful to them when they get a text later on from another student that says, "Are you okay? I saw what happened. How can I help?" Or they get that phone call, right? "I just wanted to check in with you." Or the teacher checks in with them the next day, right? About something that they heard or said. So this doesn't necessarily happen in the moment, but after the fact. And when you receive this from someone else, that they're checking in with you, you feel, wow, someone noticed and they were thinking about me, and then they took an action to show me that they're concerned about me and wondering about my well-being. And that is such a wonderful thing, a gift to give to someone. So these are the upstander skills that we can teach all of our students and have them practice and use that, encourage them to use them when there's a bullying situation. These are skills they can use anytime, anywhere. And of course, if students are in danger or someone's being, physically harmed or even really emotionally targeted, we also certainly want them to tell us and to report it so that we can assist them to help find a good solution to that problem. Okay, so the last thing I want to discuss is the restorative approach. And this is being used to help address some bullying situations, and it's different from the peer mediation process, so some of you might be familiar with it. In the restorative approach, we're going to bring together both the bully, and I have these in quotes because I believe that everyone can change their behavior, and they're not to be defined by their behavior or by what's being done to them. That's why I have bully and victim in quotes. So, but for shorthand, we'll use those terms. So you bring together the bully, you bring together the victim, and also invite any other individuals who are impacted by the bullying dynamic. So that might mean other students. It could mean parents, teachers, friends, anyone who's impacted by it. The focus on the restorative approach is to repair the harm that's been done. So it means restore the relationship, right? So the focus is not necessarily on punishment, although the bully might agree to make amends in some way. And that might be similar to a punishment that we might mete out, or it might be very different. But the focus is not on that. The focus is on how can we repair the harm that's been done, and putting that in the lap of the person who's done the harm. So it's their responsibility to repair it. And we can use this approach in a classroom circle or in a facilitated dialogue. This approach is more effective in handling bully situations than pure mediation because it addresses the power imbalance between the target or the victim and the bully. Because we've clearly identified that there's a power imbalance, we're going to give support to the victim and the target, right? With helping them maybe think through how to express themselves, inviting them to have their needs and their stories be heard, and hold the bully accountable for listening to that, for acknowledging what they've done wrong, and to address the impact of that harm and take responsibility by saying, okay, what would the target or victim like me to do to amend this situation? And that's a different kind of conversation. It's not really brainstorming around a mutual conflict problem. It's really asking the target or the victim, what would be most useful to you in helping you heal from the situation, and asking the bully, what can you do, right, to repair this relationship? So in the restorative approach, both participants need to be willing, to sit down and to do this. But even if the bully is not very willing at first, because we bring more of a community together, there's sort of a container there, right, that's sort of protecting the target and encouraging the bully to take responsibility for their actions and to be a part of the problem-solving process in a way that's inclusive. Not about demonizing that person or shutting them out of the group in some way, but about giving them an opportunity to repair the wrong that they've done so that they can continue to be included in that community. So that is the restorative approach, and maybe some of you are using that. So we have reviewed conflict, what the definition is of conflict, and also the definition of bullying, and we've looked at different criteria there. We've reviewed some ways to help students manage conflict by learning some new skills and applying them. We've discussed peer mediation and the role that it can play in the conflict process. And then we discussed how to address bullying situations through some basic prevention and intervention, including upstander skills. And I introduced the idea of using restorative practices then to address a bullying victim dynamic in a way that's productive but holding the bully accountable. So I hope that you've learned some new strategies, at least one new thing, and I would love to take some questions before I share some additional information to close out the webinar. So if anyone has questions, you can please feel free to share them in the chat, and I'm going to ask Cindy to help me with fielding those if there are any there.
We'll do it.
Thank you.
And someone says hello.
Great. Hi. Thanks for being here.
Okay, someone's actually typing a question, so I'll let them finish, but we do have one coming in.
Great. Thank you.
Okay, the question is, how can we let the schools know about this great information?
Oh, fantastic. Well, you can certainly reach out to me, and I am more than happy to share this information with your school. And I have some, I guess I'll share with you some resources now that might be helpful. So the first is my book, Create a Culture of Kindness in Middle School. You can get a 25% discount on that by using the coupon code CULTURE at freespirit.com. And if you're not at a middle school, but you're in an elementary school, I recommend this book called No Kidding About Bullying. And it's written by the co-author of Create a Culture of Kindness. Her name is Naomi Drew. And that's also offered through Free Spirit, for sure. And you can visit my website, which is peacepraxis.com, and ask any questions that you'd like to ask there. And I'll feel free to, ask for resources or other websites, and I will send you that information. I regularly work with schools and do presentations. So if you're interested in that, let me know. And then if you're interested in helping folks at your school just get more educated about these topics, there's a few conferences coming up you might be interested in. One is the International Bullying Prevention Association Conference, which I've presented at in the past. This year it's in Nashville in early November, so you can look that up online. There is a program through ASCA that you had mentioned, Cindy, if you wouldn't mind mentioning that now. I think that's useful.
Sure. And before I do that, we had one other question that I'd like to ask you. One of our viewers would like to know, are there any materials for high schools that you would recommend?
Oh, yes. Yes, there's a great book called Conflict Resolution in High School, 36 Lessons by Carol Miller-Lieber. There's some really good mediation resources for high school that probably online peer mediation has. I'll let you speak to those, Cindy, but also the School Mediators Field Guide is one of my favorites. That's by Richard Cohen. I have a library of like 300 books, so feel free to go to my website and use the contact form there, and I will send you, a list of resources for high school, but there are, many of them out there.
And one more question for you, Christa. So one of our viewers would like to know, will you be in California anytime soon?
Yes, I'm planning a speaking tour in California for the spring, but I'm looking to line up connections at schools and organizations. So please contact me so that I can visit you when I'm there.
And we're very excited to send you a fee.
Okay, great.
Now, would you like for me to speak about the ASCA bullying certification?
Yes.
Okay. So if any of you know or may be school counselors, ASCA, which is the American School Counselor Association, has an online bullying prevention specialist. I actually took the course. It was very helpful. And you do get a certificate at the end. But if you're not a school counselor, if you want to get that information to your school counselor, they can go to the American School Counselor website, and they can actually register for that. It does cost a little money, but I thought it was very well worth it.
Thank you. I have another opportunity as well that is a certificate course in social emotional learning, both for practitioners and educational leaders. And you can find out more about that at selinschools.org. And it's a fantastic program. I'm involved with that program, and it's online, so you can do it from wherever you are. I also recommend that you visit the pacer.org website for some more information on bullying prevention, specifically, PACER.org. They always have useful resources there. It is National Conflict Resolution Month, as well as National Bullying Prevention Awareness Month. So there's a lot going on with webinars and programs everywhere. So if you want to Google those terms, you'll probably come across a bunch more resources. What about that website, Cindy, that acresolution.org? I'm forgetting exactly what it is.
Oh, yeah.
It's very good, though.
There's a CRE
yes.
education. It's creducation.org, which is
right. .net. Actually, I'm just looking.
.net. Thank you.
Yeah.
And that is actually run by Bill Waters, which is a good friend of the online peer mediation platform. And some of you guys out there, I see your names. So That is it has free resources. It will put you in contact with lots of different people as well.
Yes, that is a very good website with tons of information, articles, everything on it. I'm just clicking to my last slide here so you have that in front of you. So yeah, there's really so many resources out there now. It's fantastic. You know, the field of conflict resolution in schools and peer mediation and bullying prevention, they've all been growing and developing over the past 20, 25 years. And there's excellent research now in, you know, social emotional learning and restorative practices and all these related fields. So it's super exciting because you can find lesson plans, research articles on really any of these topics for any age level student you're working with. And again, if you're looking for something specific, feel free to send me an email because I would be more than happy to point you in the right direction.
Awesome. Thank you, Christa.
You're welcome.
And we had another question or a comment. I joined the webinar late. Is this webinar recorded and where can I find it? And I can answer that question. Yes, it is. And we will send it out to you, as well as it will be on our Facebook page, which is the online peer mediation platform, and our Twitter page as well. And then Christa will also have this available that if she wants to send it out to any of her contacts as well, she will. So I hope that helps.
Yes, definitely. And feel free to, you know, share that with people and spread it around so that folks have this information.
Absolutely. And Christa, if you will stop sharing for just a moment, I'm going to put up our next slide for just a moment, if you guys will give me a minute. Okay, so Christa is actually going to have a call to action by our online peer mediation platform team. So Christa, would you like to give our audience their next steps?
Sure. So we had a few next steps for you. So one is to look up some of those resources we just shared, some of those websites, look up some of those conferences that are available to you, see how you can get involved. For sure, you can look into getting, you know, those books we mentioned and resources. And we would also like you to make sure that you are on the list so you find out what webinar topics are coming up for our online peer mediation program from our team, because they're always free and they're always really interesting topics. And Cindy, I think you have a slide with those available, right?
I do. Here are some possible upcoming topics. We have reached out to many experts, and we have already gotten many responses back so far. We know restorative practices is a go. We will have our expert from Fairfax County, Virginia. We know that social emotional learning in elementary school is going to be presented as well as culturally responsive practices. We're going to actually have 2 of those webinars because we've had lots of responses to that. And also conflict coaching, which is something I've recently been trained in, and we're going to have the expert Patty Porter. She's going to come on and she's going to talk a lot about that and what that is. So we've had some really neat stuff, and we hope that you will definitely join us. And in case you want to know where we're located, here's where we're located. This is our website, and we're on Twitter and we're on Facebook. So Christa, back to you.
Great, thank you. So I hope this information has been helpful to you today. Thank you so much for the work that you're doing in your schools and community organizations with both adults and youth. I'm always excited to discuss these topics because we're all on our own learning journey with them. You know, this isn't just kid stuff. I always tell the kids that when I'm working with them. This is for we adults as well. And as we develop our own skills in these areas, we can be better models for all of the students with whom we're working as we practice and share and model, making mistakes and growing, but being committed to peaceful conflict resolution and preventing bullying to show others that we really have a value for that is so important, and our kids are always watching. So thank you so much for educating yourselves on this and for spreading the words to others, and I hope to see you on future webinars. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, and we will be sending out the recording shortly, so stay tuned. Bye, everyone.
Bye.